I should have seen it coming the moment he walked through the doors. The way his shoes clicked too loudly on the marble floor. The way his eyes flicked across the open plan office like he was calculating its worth. Even his handshake. It was all grip and no warmth. The kind of squeeze you give when you're trying to establish dominance in 5 seconds or less. Miles Harrington, the new CEO. The man corporate had brought in with all the bells and whistles, a slick resume, buzzwords for days, and an ego that could fill an entire server room. To the board, he was a visionary disruptor. To me, he was trouble. I'd been with Virex Technologies for nearly 12 years. I'd helped build it from the ground up, back when our server room was a broom closet, and our big win was landing a contract with a mid-sized logistics firm. We'd grown. I'd grown. From junior analyst to director of strategy. My fingerprints were on nearly every major system upgrade and client retention plan. This company wasn't just my job. It was my legacy. But legacy means little to someone who only sees numbers. Miles came in like a storm wrapped in a designer suit. His first week was all about synergy and scalability. He cut 4 departments before he learned the names of the people in them. He held impromptu meetings, sent 3 a.m. Slack messages, and tried to dismantle our systems without understanding how any of them actually worked. Still, I tried to help him. God knows I tried. I offered transition documents, key contacts, internal workflow charts. I even extended an olive branch in the form of a lunch invitation. He canceled twice. On the 3rd attempt, his assistant replied with a calendar link and a note that read, "Miles prefers brief, strategic interactions. Please limit to 15 minutes. Strategic interactions. Right. At first, I thought he just needed time to acclimate. But by the 3rd week, it was clear. Miles wasn't here to collaborate. He was here to conquer. One morning, I walked into my office to find the door slightly ajar. Inside, a junior associate, someone I didn't recognize, was rifling through my filing cabinet. He jumped when I stepped in. "I was told to retrieve these," he said quickly, holding up a folder. "Told by who?" I asked, even though I already knew. He hesitated. "Mr. Harrington, when I confronted Miles later that day, he didn't deny it. He simply said, 'I need to understand who's essential to this company's future and who's just holding on to its past.'" I stood there, stunned. "You think I'm the past?" He smiled thinly. "We'll find out soon enough." That was the moment I knew. My time at Virex was on borrowed hours. But what Miles didn't know was that I had seen this type before. And unlike him, I never walked into battle unprepared. The first time Miles fired someone, it was almost too easy for him. I watched it unfold from my corner of the conference room, barely able to hold back a sigh. It wasn't because I was indifferent to the man losing his job. Tom was a senior project manager with over a decade at Virex. I felt for him. No, it was because I could already see the way Miles operated, like a puppet master pulling strings without a care for the people attached to them. Miles didn't fire Tom with a conversation. There were no explanations, no discussions about next steps or severance. He just told Tom that his department's performance was subpar and that they were pivoting to a new strategy, one that didn't involve him. It was the coldness in Miles's eyes that made the whole thing feel like a setup. "Thanks for your service," Miles said, turning back to his tablet like Tom's career didn't even matter. Tom left the room, stunned and speechless, while the rest of us sat frozen, unsure how to respond. Some of us exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one spoke up. What could we say? Miles was the boss now. He was the one pulling the strings. And while I didn't know it yet, that day marked the beginning of something bigger. A shift I couldn't ignore. That night, I found myself tossing and turning in bed, the sting of what I'd witnessed keeping me awake. The truth was, I had been working here long enough to recognize the signs of a company on the edge. I opened my laptop and scanned through a few company reports, my eyes scanning over the numbers. Everything in the financials seemed stable for now. No massive red flags. But I could feel it. The storm brewing beneath the surface. Miles was making bold moves, but I didn't trust his instincts. He thought he could cut people out and streamline the company, but he didn't understand the culture we'd spent years building. Without the right people in place, a company's heart dies first. The next day, I didn't take the meeting with him that was scheduled in my calendar. I couldn't bring myself to sit across from him, hearing his polished, rehearsed words, knowing that everything he said was part of a plan to turn the company into something that was no longer recognizable. Instead, I made a decision. I called a few key people in the company, people I trusted, and I told them what was happening. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't try to downplay it. I told them Miles would destroy everything Virex had worked so hard to build. "What can we do?" Ravi, the lead developer, asked me over the phone. "Keep your eyes open," I said, leaning back in my chair. "We need to start collecting data. Anything. Emails, decisions, meetings that don't make sense. We need a paper trail. If we're going to protect this company, we need to be smart." And so we did. Slowly but surely, the team I trusted began to compile what I knew would be our ammunition. In the meantime, Miles grew more comfortable with his reign. He changed the flow of communication, switching from email to encrypted messaging systems that made it difficult for anyone to track his decisions. He tightened his grip on the company, always careful not to show any cracks in his leadership. But Miles underestimated me. He didn't know I had already anticipated his next move. I'd been through this before with other executives, men who thought power was a one-way street, that it was enough to just push and push until everyone fell into line. The thing is, when you push people too hard, they don't break. They fight back. So, I made my move. I reached out to Delilah, one of the few people who'd always had my back, no matter how the wind blew. She'd retired from the industry years ago, but I knew she still had influence. After a long conversation, I was sure she'd be on our side. She helped me make connections with people who could help us turn the tide. But we couldn't be too obvious. Miles had already started consolidating his power, and if we made too much noise, we'd risk losing everything. We had to be quiet. We had to be patient. And above all, we had to play the long game. By the time Miles started firing people who had been with the company for decades, his arrogance blinded him. He thought he was invincible. But the truth was, he was digging his own grave, one cut at a time. The first time he tried to fire me, I saw it coming. It happened faster than I expected. By the time I walked into the office that fateful Monday morning, something felt off. The air was thick with unease, and the usual buzz of the open-plan office seemed quieter, almost stifled. I could feel the whispers even before I saw the email in my inbox. Subject: Urgent Meeting, CEO. I should have known. That was the last straw. When Miles called a meeting like that, you knew he was going to make a move. His way of doing things wasn't subtle. He didn't believe in discussions, only directives. That was how he operated. He gave orders, and you either followed them or you were out. I gathered my thoughts quickly, making my way to the boardroom. The usual faces were already seated: Janet, Ravi, and a few others who'd been with the company for longer than I'd been alive. We all exchanged quiet glances, but no one dared speak. Miles arrived a few minutes later, his usual confidence evident in the sharp click of his heels. He didn't greet anyone. Instead, he slid into the chair at the head of the table, his gaze flicking over all of us as if he were deciding who was most expendable. "I'm sure you're all aware," he began, his tone clipped, "that we're restructuring the company to meet the new strategic direction. Some of you will be let go, effective immediately." His words hung in the air, heavy and cold. I already knew what this meant. I wasn't blind. I'd seen the way he'd been systematically dismantling departments, shifting roles, and replacing veterans with outsiders. There was a pattern to it, but hearing it said out loud made it real. I tried to keep my face neutral, but my heart rate picked up. It was all happening too fast. He continued, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I've spoken to HR. The layoffs are finalized. We're just waiting for the formalities. This is the future, people. Either you adapt or you don't." There was no mention of severance, no explanation of how this would affect the company's culture, or even the logistics of what would happen to those who were dismissed. Just cold, corporate efficiency. That was Miles's brand. I saw the others shift uncomfortably in their seats, some exchanging glances, others avoiding his gaze altogether. Ravi, always the vocal one, finally broke the silence. Miles, what about the projects we've already started? The client commitments? Miles didn't flinch. We'll pivot. We'll outsource. As for the contracts, that's no longer your concern. The words were like a slap to the face. He was tearing down everything we had worked for, years of relationships, of building trust with clients, and replacing it with something hollow. He wasn't just taking people's jobs, he was taking away their purpose. I don't think you understand the magnitude of what you're doing, I spoke up, my voice more forceful than I had intended. You can't just rip apart the company and expect everything to fall into place. It's not that simple. Miles's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his expression. A hint of annoyance, maybe even a little fear. I'm doing what needs to be done. You're free to leave if you don't like it, Rebecca. His words were like a challenge, a dare, and I could feel the weight of it. This wasn't about the company anymore. This was about his ego. He was trying to break me. I held my ground. No, I'm not leaving, but you will. The words slipped out before I could stop them, but once they were said, there was no taking them back. Everyone in the room went still. Miles' jaw tightened. He had heard me, and he didn't like it. Excuse me? He asked, his voice low, menacing. I said you will, I repeated, my gaze steady. You don't know what you're messing with. You think you can push us around, fire people without a second thought, and still expect us to follow you? You've underestimated the people in this company. You've underestimated me. For a moment, there was silence, uncomfortable, thick with tension. The others watched, eyes wide, waiting for a confrontation that they knew was inevitable. Miles leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. You're either with me or against me, Rebecca. I'm giving you a choice. Fall in line or leave. My pulse quickened. He was laying down the gauntlet, but I wasn't afraid. I had already made my decision. I don't need your permission to stay, I said, my voice unwavering. And I don't need your approval. You'll learn what happens when you push people to the edge. I stood up, gathered my things, and walked out of the room without another word. But even as I left the boardroom, I knew it wasn't over. It had only just begun. There's something chilling about knowing exactly when and how a fire will start, even if no one else can smell the smoke yet. Miles thought he had won. His public announcement after my departure was laced with buzzwords: forward thinking, agile restructuring, and cutting-edge leadership. But beneath the confident branding, he had no idea he was sitting atop a powder keg. He didn't just fire me, he fired the system that kept Virex standing. But that was part of my plan. Back at my private office, a modest space above a co-working hub downtown, I worked 12-hour days in silence. My firm, Backline Strategies, had grown quietly since its creation. It started as a compliance auditing side venture, but over time, I'd expanded its services: IT diagnostics, digital risk assessments, vendor policy audits. I hired only the best, people with integrity and experience, many of whom had left Virex after Miles' purge. And more importantly, I kept it invisible. Miles had no idea that a significant number of Virex's third-party audits and compliance reports were being prepared by the very man he had kicked out. He'd never read the contracts. He didn't even look at the names on the service agreements. To him, they were numbers, budget lines. Backline Strategies was our Trojan horse, and I had just wheeled it through the gates. The spark? A system update to Virex's new platform, VX Connect. It was a sleek client data sharing tool, fast-tracked for release to impress investors. In our last audit, conducted just before my termination, we flagged over 30 security vulnerabilities, including 2 that could allow remote access through an authentication bypass. I knew Miles. He'd ignore it. He did. 2 weeks after launch, a logistics client in Ohio reported a system crash during peak hours. Their IT team investigated and found traces of unauthorized access logs. It didn't make headlines yet, but I knew it would. And I was ready. Backline issued a follow-up report, sent quietly to the executive compliance liaison, someone who used to work under me and still trusted my name. We marked it urgent. Again, silence from Miles's team. I called Ravi, my longtime friend and cybersecurity lead. Stage 2, I told him. He sighed. You sure? It'll burn. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. That's the idea. We deployed a full forensic audit, discreet but thorough. Within 48 hours, we had a detailed timeline of the breach. When it happened, how and where Virex's software had failed. It all matched the vulnerabilities I had flagged months prior. I didn't go to the press, not yet. That wasn't the play. Instead, I went to Northex Industries, Virex's crown jewel client. Their CIO, Marlene Fisher, was a veteran. Sharp, detail-obsessed. We had crossed paths several times when I was still at Virex, and I knew she valued transparency above all. I requested a private meeting. No presentations. Just me, a laptop, and the truth. In a dim-lit lounge near her headquarters, I opened a folder and slid it across the table. This is what you weren't told. She leafed through the documents slowly. Graphs, timelines, internal memos, email excerpts, every piece meticulously compiled. When she looked up, her expression had hardened. Why are you doing this, Alex? Because I helped build the system they're now dismantling, and because if someone doesn't stop him, a lot of people are going to get hurt. She stared at me for a long moment. When this story breaks, she said finally, they'll come after you too. I smiled. I'm counting on it. 3 days later, Northex terminated their $25 million annual contract with Virex. The tremors hit the company like a tsunami. Suddenly, Miles' agile empire didn't look so invincible, and the fire had only just begun. The Northex pullout was a public relations nightmare, and a personal one for Miles. He tried to contain it, of course, spun it as a strategic reallocation on LinkedIn, recycled buzzwords like pivot, scalable growth, and new partnerships. But inside Virex, the mood had shifted. People weren't buying it. It started with whispers in the hallways, cautious eyes in conference rooms. Miles doubled down on appearances, holding aggressive Monday morning meetings where he spewed optimism like a broken fire hydrant. But optimism doesn't fix broken code. The security flaws in VX Connect couldn't be patched overnight. The more they tried to band-aid the leaks, the more the system buckled under scrutiny. Smaller clients began pulling out. Then came the internal resignations. First, the QA team leader, then the lead developer on the integration module. By the end of the second week, the CTO himself had walked out, leaving a 2-sentence resignation letter that ended with, "You don't build a product on a graveyard." It wasn't just about the breach anymore. It was about how Miles handled it, suppressing reports, dismissing experts, firing whistleblowers. All of it created an internal paper trail. And with my contacts still quietly embedded across departments, those papers found their way to me. Every single one. At Backline, we worked late into the nights. Ravi and I pieced together the story like forensic analysts at a crime scene. I kept every thread traceable, every email, every decision Miles made against our warnings. And then came the opportunity. A connection from Delilah, one of my early mentors who had retired the year before, introduced me to a discreet network of private equity firms. People who believed in rebuilding legacy tech firms and flipping them through internal reform. I met them at a rooftop lounge in the financial district. I'm not here to make millions, I told them over whiskey. I'm here to reclaim something that mattered. If you back me, I won't just turn it around. I'll bring the soul back. They liked that. With quiet backing, we formed a shell entity, Reclaim Dynamics. We structured it like a lifeline acquisition, one that appeared benevolent and neutral. Through intermediaries, we reached out to the Virex board, presenting an offer. Miles never saw it coming. Desperate to show strength, he actually welcomed the pitch. He thinks he's winning, Delilah laughed over the phone when she heard. He thinks they're saving him. He's halfway through writing his own downfall, I replied. Let's just hand him the pen. A week later, I walked into a high-rise conference room overlooking the city skyline. Miles was already there, seated in a gray suit 2 sizes too slim, playing the role of visionary leader. He grinned when he saw me. I suppose you came to witness the handover, he said, motioning to the documents on the table. Reclaim Dynamics. Interesting name. Very, I said as I sat down. You know, I always knew you'd try something, he said. I just didn't think you had the stomach for a full takeover. I didn't answer. He leaned forward. It's too late anyway. Whatever fire you think you started, I'm still the face of Virex. These guys want me. They need me. That's when the door opened. Delilah walked in first, serene as ever. Ravi followed. Behind him, 3 familiar faces from Virex's founding team, people who had left in protest months ago. And Janet, the financial analyst Miles had humiliated and fired over a projection spreadsheet, took a seat beside me. The room fell silent. Miles blinked, looking at them, then back at me. What is this? I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the final document. The ownership transfer agreement. You just signed Virex over to us, I said. Effective immediately. His jaw dropped, but no words came out. We've been acquiring shares quietly through third parties for weeks, Delilah added. This wasn't a rescue. It was a return. You lied, he said, voice cracking. No, I said. You just never cared to look deeper. He stood up, knocking his chair over in the process. You can't do this. This company is mine. I rebuilt it. You gutted it, Janet said quietly, and now it's ours to fix. Miles looked around the table. No one stood with him. His hands trembled. This is mutiny. No, I said, calm and firm. This is justice. He left the building that day, clutching a box of personal items and shredding the dignity he thought was untouchable. He never came back. The first day after the takeover felt strange, like waking up in your childhood home after years away. Familiar, but dusty. As I walked through the halls of Virex, now mine again, I could still feel the weight of Miles' regime in the air. The glass walls he loved so much? Gone. First thing I ordered was a full teardown of his productivity pods and his ridiculous CEO portrait that hung at the entrance. I kept the same office, but I swapped out the cold, gray desk for a warm wood table. I brought in plants, books, photos of the original team. A handwritten note Delilah gave me on my first day as team lead, framed beside my monitor. It read, "Lead from the soul, not the ego. People follow people, not titles." The staff's return was slow but steady. Former employees, once burned by corporate betrayal, began reaching out. Some emailed resumes, others just dropped in for coffee. One by one, I welcomed them back. Not because we needed bodies, but because we needed heart. Janet returned to finance with a new title, Head of Operations. She cried the first time she saw her name on the executive floor directory. Ravi and his cybersecurity team built a new arm under the company, one dedicated solely to transparency and accountability. Every project launched from that day forward had to pass a double verification process. Internal checks, external audits. We put humility at the center of innovation. And the culture, that was the real work. We brought back weekly roundtables where anyone, not just senior staff, could pitch ideas. We revived the internal mentorship program, and every new hire sat through Legacy Day, where we told the story of how the company nearly died from arrogance and came back to life through integrity. One afternoon, while standing by the windows that overlooked the city skyline, I saw a young intern sitting in the same break room where Miles once ordered staff not to loiter. He was sketching designs on a napkin. UI layouts, it looked like. Passion in his posture, hunger in his eyes. And I realized we were building again. Not just platforms, not just software. We were building trust. 2 months later, the message came in from an unrecognized domain. I almost deleted it, but something made me open it. I underestimated you. You win. Miles. That was it. No threats, no blame. Just 6 words that probably cost him more than all the lawsuits he was juggling. I stared at the screen for a moment, then archived the message under a folder titled Fuel. I had no interest in revenge, just records. 6 months later, Virex, now branded Virex 1, had not only stabilized, but exceeded projections. Clients returned. New contracts were inked. Investors who once backed away were now knocking again, surprised by the speed of our recovery. But I declined most offers. We weren't for sale anymore. At our end-of-year company retreat, held at a modest lakeside cabin instead of some five-star resort, I stood before a crowd of 140 team members, each holding a mug of hot cider, bonfire smoke curling through the crisp air. 6 months ago, I said, this company was a shell of itself. We didn't just fix the product, we fixed the people, the culture, the core. I paused, meeting the eyes of old friends and new faces. And if there's one thing I've learned from this journey, it's that you don't protect a company with policies or slogans. You protect it with people who believe in it, who defend it when no one's watching, who know that doing the right thing might cost you in the short term, but always pays you back in legacy. They clapped. Some cheered. Janet raised her mug. To legacy! To legacy! They echoed. I wasn't the hero of this story. I didn't slay the dragon. I was the dragon, for a while. Comfortable, complacent, until I was pushed out by a man who mistook leadership for domination. Miles thought he fired me, but all he did was set me free to become the leader I was always meant to be. He built a throne out of fear. I built a family out of fire. And in the end, the only thing stronger than ambition is the courage to rebuild from the ashes.